After a decade in the making, China and Australia finally sealed their landmark free trade deal. How will it boost two-way trade, and how will it help Australia diversify its economy to offset the mining sector's slump? Join us this week as Cheng Lei speaks to Andrew Robb, Australian Minister for Trade and Investment, only on CCTV News, only on BizTalk.
Welcome to BizTalk. I'm Cheng Lei in Beijing. Just 2 weeks after China and Australia announced the conclusion of free trade agreement talks, the two countries are holding high-level dialogues. We find out from Andrew Robb, Minister for Trade and Investment, about how the two countries are going to make the most out of the free trade agreement. On November 17, 2014, China and Australia sealed a landmark free trade agreement that was almost a decade in the making. Australia says once the agreement is fully implemented, 95% of all its exports will enjoy duty-free entry into China. Analysts say the deal will open up the vast Chinese markets to a range of Australian industries, including farm exporters and the services sector. On the other hand, analysts say the FTA will open the floodgates to increased investments from China, especially from private firms, due to easier regulatory approval. China is already Australia's top trading partner, with 20% of Australian imports coming from China and 36% of exports going to China. Bilateral trade totaled around $130 billion in 2013. Some have called this FTA a dairy and beef deal, but there are opportunities for services, for advanced manufacturing. How should companies in those sectors take advantage of the deal?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, often the focus, certainly in Australia, is, and I suspect here, because of the interest in clean and green and healthy food. So dairy and beef and sheep meat and other things get quite a lot of attention. But I think the essence of this deal is the growth in the trade in services. And it has opened up the Chinese market to aged care, to health services, education services, logistics services, project management, design, you name it, all sorts of services. Now, the opportunity is there now for Australian companies to come in and have substantial or fully owned services, employ Chinese, bring our IP. I think there's going to be very complementary opportunities because China needs to move more and more to a service-based economy if China wants to create the jobs. And the jobs are in services, lots of jobs. So I think you'll see across a wide range of services a lot of interest. Already I've got Chinese companies talking to me in Australia about opportunities to invest in services activities in Australia, and Australian companies will be doing the same in reverse.
So what are the things standing in the way of companies on both sides getting the best, getting the most out of these opportunities?
Well, I think it's resolve. Okay, there's now significant opportunities. It takes a bit of courage to, especially for Australian companies. I suspect the same for a lot of Chinese companies, especially the smaller ones and the mid-sized ones, to take the risk of going into another country. The trading side is not so bad, but to invest and establish in another country is a big step. But the thing is now we have a framework which adds certainty. There's certain rules that have been established for entry and for trading, and special reductions in protection and whatever, and they can't be reversed because we've reached an agreement. So it does add a lot more certainty than was there before, but it also shows the intent of both countries to want to do business. And that means if there are problems, there's far more chance of those problems being addressed by the governments and giving more confidence to businesses to make that big step.
Right now, investment flows are much less than the trade flows. Where do you see that number going after the FTA?
Well, historically, if you look at around the world, wherever countries have developed a large trading relationship, inevitably you get a large investment relationship that follows. Australia's trading relationship now with China is its biggest by a long way. Now with the free trade agreement, which gives more certainty about the rules, I think we'll start to see very strong flows of Chinese investment, but importantly also quite strong flows, I think, from Australia into China, especially in the services space. Coming here into China with aged care services, with private hospital services, with restaurant services, with hotel services, with insurance services, with financial services. There'll be a lot of investment this way. And now that's the great thing. We have reached a point where there's now an opportunity and an encouragement by both governments to invest both ways. And I think you'll see a very significant growth across the board, agriculture and services.
What do you make of a scepticism in the Australian media about the FTA, that milk prices are going to go up because of more exports to China, that local workers may lose jobs because of cheaper Chinese labour and so on?
Well, it's misplaced. Firstly, we need investment, to really capture the opportunities that are emerging in China for dairy products of all sorts, for beef and sheep meats and seafoods, and, all of these things that we are traditionally good at. But we need to improve our processing, improve our logistics, our transport, more consolidation, so we've got bigger, more efficient enterprises. Now, all of that needs money, and I think we will see as we pour the money and the investment into those sorts of productivity-related developments and innovation, we will produce more milk, and invariably the more supply, they'll keep some downward pressure for consumers on prices, but make more profits because they're producing more milk. And I think it's all a win-win, to be honest. Everywhere I've seen elsewhere, if you push up the price, it invites more investment, you get more innovation, and you get better profits and lower prices. So that's the way the market works. People tend to think of it as a static point in time, but this is a great opportunity to grow our market, grow our expertise, grow our innovation, be at the forefront, premium products, and I think both Chinese business and Australian businesses will share in that development.
You've also been speaking to investors, many of them long-term Chinese investors in Australia. What's their feedback been like about the FTA?
They are enormously encouraged. I think in many cases the free trade agreement wasn't directed at long-term investors because they've already got established commercial arrangements, etc. But one, it opens up new avenues for them to invest, but importantly it just takes the whole relationship to another level. And for them, if they've got problems, opportunities, if the relationship at the government level is at a high quality, it can help them resolve problems or to take advantage of important opportunities.
So what are you advising Chinese and Australian companies in getting ready for the FTA?
To engage quickly, because it's going to take us probably another 6 or 7 months to get it through, because there's a lot of legal work and translations and all sorts of things to be done before we finalise this, and it has to go through our parliament, as it has to go through the Chinese system. But in that 7 months, I don't think companies should wait. They should start to, if they're not already involved, they should start to explore opportunities, try and meet potential partners or trading partners or investment partners, or talk to intermediaries who might help them identify opportunities, give them good advice, so that when this does enter into force, probably around September or October in 2015, that they'll be ready to move quickly and take advantage of these new arrangements.
Now, large SOEs have traditionally been large investors in Australia, but this FTA doesn't provide for a higher investment review threshold. Why did China accept that?
it got difficult. We have provided the $1 billion threshold for private companies, and there are 100,000, more than 100,000 private companies now in China, and some very significant ones. So we have provided an increased threshold for China. With the state-owned enterprises, we decided to hold that over for 3 years. China was finding it very difficult to move on rice and cotton and sugar and grains any more than they've already moved under the WTO agreements of some years ago. I understood the political pressures and the sensitivities in that area, so we agreed, myself and Minister Gao, that we put those two issues to one side for 3 years. We'll revisit it in 3 years' time, but we got on with the rest of the agreement, which was probably 96% of it. The other thing is that there has been this Foreign Investment Review Board procedure for state-owned enterprises, but it has not held up any investment, in fact. I can see how it's sometimes a frustration to go through it, but we have had literally thousands of investments from China over the last decade or so, which have gone through that Foreign Investment Review Board process, but have gone on to be very substantial, many of them very profitable, and certainly things that investments that we have welcomed most warmly.
After a decade in the making, China and Australia finally sealed their landmark free trade deal. How will it boost two-way trade, and how will it help Australia diversify its economy to offset the mining sector's slump? Join us this week as Cheng Lei speaks to Andrew Robb, Australian Minister for Trade and Investment, only on CCTV News, only on BizTalk.
With slow progress on multilateral trade talks initiated by the World Trade Organization, the world's major economies scramble to sign second-best agreements with their largest trading partners. Australia is one of the active players. Before Australia announced the conclusion of free trade talks with China, the country reached free trade agreements with two other major Asian economies, Japan and South Korea, in addition to 7 FTA deals that are already in force. The country is also in talks on 7 potential bilateral or multilateral free trade deals, including one with India. In late November, Australia reiterated its commitment to sign a free trade agreement with India within a year. But are Australian businesses getting on the FTA bandwagon and making it work for them? HSBC has found that only 19% of Australian companies are utilising the free trade agreements, less than the average level of 26% among Asian exporters.
So just 2 weeks after the two countries announced the conclusion of FTA talks, you're back here for high-level dialogues. Tell us how these conversations are going to help the relationship forward.
Well, any relationship depends on or is based on trust. I mean, if you establish a large measure of trust, then all sorts of good things happen. It's true in your own family relationships, in your companies, but it's also true between countries. And so the dialogue and the continuing contact is now even more critical, because we've got a framework through the Free Trade Agreement to see a lot of mutual benefit in commerce, but we still have to keep building the trust, and if we do that, it'll be a great relationship.
A survey shows that only 19% of Australian companies actually make use of Australia's FTAs with other countries, which is less than other Asia-Pacific countries. What would your ministry do to help lift that percentage?
This year we brought 700 Australian business people in May with the Prime Minister and myself. We're going to repeat that every 2 years, an Australia Week in China, but in between times we're going to bring delegations, both myself and all of my ministerial colleagues, whenever they're coming to China, to bring a smaller delegation of business people to, again, just keep advising and showcasing the opportunities. As well, we've got a very big communications program with chambers of commerce and other organisations within Australia, We're creating a portal so that our millions of small businesses can easily access what the opportunities are. We're going to make a much bigger effort than we ever have with a free trade agreement to advise, because this is a most outstanding agreement that's been reached, and it does create enormous opportunities.
And what does it mean for the deal with India, the possible deal with India?
Well, we'll see how India goes. Prime Minister Modi is an outstanding man, and I've had a little bit to do with him since he became Prime Minister. There's enormous expectations. I think India's been a long way behind, but there are similar characteristics to where China was 20 years ago, and if Prime Minister Modi can get the bureaucracy there and focused on outcomes, I think we could see some movement. But we just started negotiations with India, and hopefully it'll be encouraged, I think, by what we've achieved with China. And I think India looks at China and thinks, you know, we can't get too far behind. Right? So all of these things provide a stimulus to activity in other areas.
You mentioned infrastructure. Australia has so far been reluctant to join the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Some have said Australia would be stupid not to join. Your thoughts?
All of us are very
what needs to happen?
Very supportive of the bank. The prospect of the bank is something that is very attractive to the Prime Minister and other members of the government. We have wanted to ensure that the governance standards are world class, as you know, similar to the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank. Now, senior Chinese officials have said to me that's what will be in the bank, and we've said as soon as there is an adoption of those governance standards, we will not only be there but be there with enthusiasm, and also, having joined, we will then encourage Japan and the United States to also join, so it is a truly multilateral body, just like the Asia Development Bank and the World Bank and other such development facilities.
Australia has been riding the wave of China-fueled mining boom for the past decade, but the heyday could be over as commodity prices continue to fall and resources investments shrink. As China embraces a slowdown to shift from investment-led growth to consumption-driven development, Australia is seeking to diversify its economy from the mining sector, and China is still a critical part of this transformation. Australia hopes China's huge consumer market will help its expansion of food and agricultural exports, moving from a mining boom to a dining boom. Australia also looks to beef up its service exports to the world's second-largest economy. The rising influx of Chinese investments in Australia are centred on these industries as well as property.
The latest GDP figures out of Australia have been disappointing. What's your outlook for the Australian economy in 2015?
It's with the boom in resources coming off, of course it's affecting our GDP. We still have quite reasonable growth for a developed country. We're one of still the highest growth developed countries in the world, but we do need to open up new opportunities. We've got, starting really next year, a massive public infrastructure program, the biggest in Australia's history. Roads and ports and rails and you name it. It's a massive hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. That will fill the gap that some of the activity that was associated with the resources boom, the gap that's starting to emerge. But again, things like the free trade agreement, not only with China but with Japan and with Korea, is opening up new opportunities, especially in services, which we have got a wide range of services, hundreds of different services, which are in demand in China in particular, but also with our agricultural products. The demand, because of the explosion of the middle class in China and other parts of the region, demand for premium agricultural produce has really taken off. I mean, 2 years ago we sold 60,000 tonnes of meat to China. last year we sold 260,000 tonnes of meat to China. The growth is enormous, and we can fill that gap. It'll take us a year or two to catch up, but I think our long-term growth prospects are very sound.
But compared to resources, it's still such a small part of the economy.
Well, no, I mean, resources are still, they're 8% of GDP. I mean, financial services, for instance, is 6.5% of GDP. It's the second biggest contributor. Okay, so if we can grow the services exports, if we can grow our involvement, for instance, in China, in providing sophisticated financial products and being a part of the growth of the financial services market here, it's very important to Australia. Yeah, so we've got a lot of resources, but they are still 8%, very important, but we've got other areas that can grow our economy in a most strong and sustainable way.
Chinese property investments in Australia have skyrocketed. Is that a concern for you?
Well, again, some of it's a bit overstated, I think. It's certainly there have been significant investments at the top end of the market and with apartments, but it has provided a lot of liquidity in the housing market, and I don't think that we've got an issue with it. If it gets, we are keeping an eye on it. So investment from anywhere in housing, if it creates too much of a disruption, governments need to act, and other governments have. We haven't seen a need to yet, and I don't think we're close to that. I think now, increasingly, especially with this free trade agreement, we're now starting to see a lot of interest going into commercial areas, other commercial areas in particular, with services and agriculture and processing and whatever.